Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are tackling a huge question about our global economy. How on earth did China become the manufacturing giant we all know today? We're going to break down the very specific, state-led strategies that literally built the world's factory.
All right, so here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll frame the big question. Then, we'll unpack the financial strategy and the national blueprint China used. After that, we'll look at the incredible competitive advantage this created, and finally, we'll get into the global backlash that came with it.
Okay, let's start with the big picture and get to the question that's really at the heart of all modern manufacturing.
Now, you might think this is just a story about business savvy or a massive workforce, but it is so much more than that. This is a fascinating look at the deliberate and incredibly powerful role of the state in designing an economic juggernaut piece by piece.
So the first piece of this massive puzzle, it's all about the money. Specifically, how the Chinese state has masterfully directed its financial resources to fuel industrial growth on a scale the world has just never seen before.
So what we're talking about here is something called state-led industrial policy. And look, this is not your typical hands-off, free market approach that you see in many Western economies. No, this is the complete opposite. It's a very hands-on strategy where the government actively picks which industries it wants to win and then gives them all the tools to do it.
And these are the actual tools in their toolbox. By offering major tax breaks, flooding companies with cheap loans from state-owned banks, and funneling cash through enormous investment funds, the government gives its chosen industries a huge built-in advantage right from the start.
Okay, so you've got the money sorted. But how does all that financial support fit into a bigger picture? Well, let's look at the national blueprint that was designed not just to compete, but to truly dominate entire global industries.
And this is where it gets really methodical. It all starts at the top with those famous 5-year plans. That high-level vision then cascades all the way down to identifying specific key industries, building up entire cities or regions around them, and then finally rewriting the laws to make it as easy as possible to produce and export.
And here you can see exactly what that looks like in the real world. The focus wasn't just on making, anything and everything. The state was incredibly strategic, targeting high-value, future-focused industries like EVs and robotics with a very clear goal, not just to play the game, but to lead it.
So, we've seen the plan, we've seen the funding. But what is the actual, real-world result of all this planning and financial muscle when it hits the global stage? What does that competitive edge really look like?
What this all adds up to is a fundamentally different way of competing. We're talking about mind-boggling scale, supply chains that are deeply integrated inside the country, which means less reliance on foreign parts, and a relentless state-supported focus on exporting. All of that works together to drive down costs in a way that market-driven economies often just can't keep up with.
Just look at this number for a second. Over 50%. I mean, that is just staggering. For something as essential to the modern world as steel, China's production capacity is so massive that it supplies more than half of the entire planet's demand. That one stat alone shows you the sheer power of this model.
Now, you can't achieve that level of dominance in the market without, ruffling some feathers. And that, of course, brings us to the inevitable international pushback and the trade disputes that have really defined the last decade. This quote pretty much sums up the feeling from many other major economies. They see China's state support as this giant thumb on the scale, tilting the entire playing field and making fair competition seem impossible. So what do? They're forced to put up their own defensive walls. And when you dig into it, the international arguments really boil down to these three things. Critics point to massive state subsidies. They accuse China of dumping, that is, selling goods in other countries for less than it even costs to make them, just to kill the competition. And they argue this whole system violates the basic principles of free and fair trade. So, the response was pretty predictable. We've seen this huge surge in international blowback. This chart shows you the main countermeasures. A ton of official trade disputes being filed, major protective tariffs getting slapped on goods, and constant calls for big changes to China's industrial policies, especially from places like the United States.
So let's put it all together. What's the formula? China's status as the world's factory really comes from this powerful mix of state money, strategic policy, and incredible scale. But as you can see here, the very same things that created this manufacturing superpower are also the exact things driving these major global trade tensions.
And all of this leaves us with a really tough, unresolved question for the future of the global economy. When one country's strategy for success is seen by everyone else as cheating, where do you even begin to draw the line? It's a complex balancing act with no easy answers, and definitely something to think about long after this explainer is over.